Hey, how's everybody doing today? Welcome to the channel. My name is Akari, and I've got a quick question for you guys. What is your favorite manga? If you're a boy who grew up in the 90s, you might say Dragon Ball. And I can't really blame you. It's like the quintessential shonen. It's got tons of cool fights, fun characters, and plenty of iconic moments in anime history. Sure, it's kinda dumb sometimes, but it's still a classic, and I have a lot of nostalgia for it. But maybe Dragon Ball is a little bit too simple for you. Maybe you prefer Naruto, another classic with some amazing fight choreography, a much more complex power system, and lots of unique, well-developed characters. It's hard not to love. But what if I told you there was a manga with fights just as intense, characters just as interesting, and a story that was just as engaging, and you've never even heard of it? Let's talk about Mahou Sensei Negima. So, when you hear Mahou Sensei Negima, I'm sure at least some of you might be thinking of that one romantic comedy harem anime from over a decade ago. And the rest of you are probably scratching your heads wondering what the hell I'm talking about. My answer is that it is easily one of the best manga series ever written, and I'm not making that claim lightly. Mahou Sensei Negima, or just Negima for short, is the story of 10-year-old Neji Springfield, a young wizard from Wales who has just graduated from the Meridiana Academy of Magic. He only has one more test to pass to become an official mage, and that is teaching English at an all-girl school in Japan? What? So, now a 10-year-old boy has to teach a class of 31 pretty older girls, all while trying to keep his magic a secret. And hijinks ensue. If you've seen the anime, then this should all sound familiar to you. There was a pretty standard romantic comedy in the same vein as To Love Ru or Love Hina, only with magic. It doesn't really hold up all that well, but it was okay. Nothing special, but okay. Or at least the anime was. The manga is a completely different story. If you've been watching anime for a while, you probably know that they usually have to change a lot from the manga they're based on. Most of the time, this just means adding filler or censoring stuff like violence and nudity. Annoying, but kind of understandable. With Negima, the anime barely resembles the manga. While the anime is just a generic rom-com, the manga turns into a full-blown fantasy action-adventure series. Just take a look at some of these panels. If you didn't know any better, you'd never guess this from the same series. The vast majority of this stuff never made it into the anime. Why is this? Well, before he wrote Negima, Kanakamatsu had just finished Love Hina. For those unfamiliar with it, Love Hina is about an unfortunate guy by the name of Keitaro. Keitaro was studying to get into Tokyo University to fulfill the promise he made with his childhood friend. But then he fails the entrance exam. Twice. And then his parents kick him out. So he has to move into the Hanada house, a dorm inhabited by 5 beautiful girls. And hijinks ensue. Now, Love Hina was actually really good. It even won the Kodansha Manga Award for Shonen in 2001. So, naturally, when it was over, his publisher wanted to capitalize on its success. Enter Mahou Sensei Negima, another romantic comedy about a young man surrounded by beautiful girls. Basically, Love Hina with magic. There's lots of humor and fan service, but if that was all, then I wouldn't be here talking about it. See, Akamatsu really wanted to write an action series, even though his publisher was against it. So we did it anyway. While it may seem like a typical harem for the first couple of volumes, as the series went on, it slowly evolved into this dramatic, action-packed adventure. Many people describe it as Love Hina meets Harry Potter meets Dragon Ball Z, which sounds pretty freaking awesome if you ask me. But unfortunately, none of this awesomeness made it to the screen. The anime never became anything more than another generic harem comedy. I know there are a lot of people out there who really like it, so I'll try not to hate on it too much, but just know that it is a terrible representation of its source material. So, with all that out of the way, let's actually talk about what makes Negima so amazing. The manga starts out just like the anime. Neji Springfield comes to Japan as an English teacher and has to try to keep his magic secret. We're introduced to Class 2A, who is one of the most interesting and diverse set of characters you'll ever see in a manga. Not every single one gets their own arc, but most of them have at least one chapter of focus, and all of them have their own unique designs, personalities, and relationships. Some get along great, some are rivals, some are geniuses, others are kind of stupid, etc. You might expect these girls to be nameless background characters, but you remember all of them. Even Asuna, his obligatory tsundere love interest, actually goes out of most of her more violent traits throughout the story. By the end of it, she just tries to support and encourage him, not just abuse him. And Neji himself is even more interesting. He's basically the anti-shonen protagonist. Most shonen action heroes are pretty dumb, at least outside of combat, but Neji is a bona fide genius. He would have to be to earn an English degree at 10 years old. And instead of the super badass, aggressive heroics we're used to, Neji is just a timid, polite, sweet little kid. It's actually pretty refreshing. Even his tragic backstory, which of course he has, is treated like a serious psychological problem. Despite his usual kind and timid personality, he actually has a whole lot of rage and hatred bottled up inside. Learning to accept the feelings that he usually denies is a really big part of his character. His ultimate goal is to become a master mage, or magister magi, like his father, who was the most famous, most powerful, most awesomest mage of all time. He mysteriously disappeared, and then he hopes to become a magister so we can find him one day. The first major story arc has him go up against one of his students, who turns out to be a vampire. This starts a long trend of his seemingly normal students being revealed as some kind of superhuman. In addition to the vampire, there's also a ghost, a ninja, a robot, a time traveler, and a demon princess. It's almost easier to list the ordinary people in the class. The vampire, Evangeline, is actually an old enemy of his father's. This is his first real challenge, and the manga's first fight. We learn about his dad, get a good idea of what magic is capable of, and get just a glimpse of what to expect down the line. Then the class takes a field trip to Kyoto, and this is where things get real. In my opinion, the Kyoto arc is where Negima becomes the series it was really meant to be. The premise is pretty simple. Neji has to deliver a letter from the chief of the Kanto Magic Association in Tokyo to the chief of the Kansai Magic Association in Kyoto, so he can form an alliance between the two groups. And throughout the trip, a group of Kansai mages try to stop him from doing just that. This arc is awesome. We get introduced to a ton of new characters and see some really intense fights. He already had a fight with Evangeline, but this just takes everything to the next level. We get magic fights, sword fights, fist fights, and everything in between. He and Evangeline mostly just pointed their wands at each other. But here, things get physical. Akamatsu wasn't afraid to let his characters bleed and bruise. It's actually kind of brutal. And they don't just punch each other either. It's a really good combination of magic and martial arts. It's not nearly as refined as it will be later in the series, but here's where it starts. You get the feeling that every move has a point. It's made very clear that your enemies will not just stand around and let you cast spells on them. So mages are basically required to use their magic in tandem with martial arts. Hitting someone with your fist is a completely different thing from blasting them with magic, and it's up to the individual to figure out how to effectively combine them to create a fighting style. And it's real martial arts too. Neji uses actual Bagua Kung Fu. Instead of the DBZ style rapid fire punches and kicks, you can actually see each individual move in the sequence. The amount of research that goes into these fight scenes is incredible. It really makes Nejima's fights seem unique, and despite all the flashy explosions, they still manage to feel grounded and real. But it's not just the action that makes the Kyoto arc so good. The pacing is excellent, the stakes are real, and the climax is easily one of the most suspenseful moments in the entire manga. It also expands on the lore by introducing Eastern magic, or Omyudo, which is a real thing that Shinto priests and Buddhists actually practiced in real life, and it operates on a completely different system than the rest of the magic in the series. But most importantly, the Kyoto arc is what pushes everyone to grow. Neji realizes how much he still has to learn, and begins training seriously. We also find out how powerful the enemies can be, and how small our heroes are in comparison. Speaking of enemies, the series doesn't have any real villains either. There are antagonists, obviously, but they don't go around kicking puppies and burning down orphanages. All of the major antagonists actually have very noble goals. Even at their worst, they all wanted to change the world for the better. It's only their extreme methods that bring them into conflict with the heroes. The best example of this is the school festival arc. I won't give any details here because the point of this video was to get you to read the manga, not to spoil it for you. But Neji spent a good chunk of the arc wondering if he should even be fighting the villain at all. Now, anti-villains are nothing new in the world of fiction, but I can't name too many that got the heroes to genuinely consider joining them. He nearly joined the villain's side, despite the fact that it would mean he would never get to see any of his friends again, and have to give up on his dream of finding his father one day, because he thought it would make the world just a little bit safer. It's a really good dilemma, and stuff like this is everywhere in the manga. Despite this, Negima never loses its humor. It knows exactly when to take itself seriously and when to joke around. It's a damn near perfect balance. If this was all there was, it would already be one of my favorite manga. But Negima somehow manages to work in giant robots, time travel, and references to classical mythology. It really is a melting pot of all things sci-fi and fantasy. I think that's why I love it so much. There's something in it for everyone. I could go on about Negima for literally hours, but I think you've got the point by now. It's amazing. So why aren't more people reading it then? Honestly, I think it's because of prejudice. Like I said at the beginning, Mahou Sensei Negima is a romantic comedy and a harem, so naturally there's a ton of fan service. Fan service doesn't exactly have the best reputation in the anime community, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't kind of get it. At its worst, fan service can distract from an engaging story with pointless softcore porn. If you're not into that, I can definitely see how it will be off-putting. I feel like most people who encounter Negima either only read the first few chapters or see that it's tagged as ecchi and drop it immediately. But fan service isn't always a bad thing. I don't hear anyone talking about how Leia's golden bikini scene ruined Star Wars for them. I understand that there are anime out there that take it way too far, with so much fan service it completely drowns out whatever story they're trying to tell. And I think this is why ecchi anime and manga get such a bad rap. But if used correctly, fan service can actually enhance a story, or at the very least attract more potential readers. For example, Kill la Kill is an incredible anime, but the main character just happens to dress like a stripper. Trust me, it makes sense in context. And the service in Negima isn't anywhere near as intense as that. It's used more for comedy than it's for titillation. It's just silly fun. Even if you hate boobies, Negima never crosses the line. Personally, I don't think the fan service distracts from the story. If anything, it just makes it stand out from other shonen. But even if you disagree, hopefully they've established by now just how much there is to love about this series. I'd say a little fan service is a pretty small price to pay. I love Negima. It is easily one of my favorite manga of all time. In my opinion, it's just as good as Naruto or Bleach. But while both of those are some of the most famous manga of all time, Mahou Sensei Negima is almost completely unknown. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration. There are definitely fans of it out there, and if any of you are watching, I hope you let me know in the comments. But I don't think it's nearly as popular as it deserves to be. And it certainly doesn't help that most who have heard of it only know about the anime. The whole point of this video was to bring it to more people's attention. Hopefully this has piqued at least some of your interest, because Negima has constantly gotten the short end of the stick. I mentioned how bad the anime was at capturing what made the original great, but there's also a second anime that doesn't even try to adapt the manga. It does something completely different. And spoiler alert, it's not very good. There are OVAs, spin-off manga, and even a live-action series. Yeah, the less said about that one, the better. It is incredible how many versions of Negima there are, and how many just aren't Negima. The only one that actually portrayed the manga accurately was the Mohitotsu no Sekai OVA, which is only 5 episodes long and adapted roughly 10 chapters, completely out of context. It's just not fair. In 2012, it was announced that Mahou Sensei Negima's manga would be ending in just 3 more chapters. Everyone reading at the time, myself included, was taken completely off guard by this statement, because there was still so much story left to tell. How did they wrap up everything in such a short amount of time? they didn't. The resolution takes place completely off screen, and the final 3 chapters effectively skip to the epilogue. I have no issue with the epilogue itself, but we weren't giving anything leading up to it. I remember where I was when I read the final chapter, and all the feelings of disappointment and emptiness it left me with. Apparently at the time, there was a law proposed in Japan that if passed would take creative freedom away from manga authors. I'll leave a link to an article about it below if you're curious, but Ken Akamatsu decided to prematurely end his work before this could happen. This isn't technically the end. The very next year, Akamatsu started a sequel series titled UQ Holder, which I will probably make a dedicated video about in the future, but regardless, fans were still left without a satisfying conclusion to the original story for 5 whole years. In short, Mahou Sensei Negima is an excellent manga with a huge cast of diverse and interesting characters, amazing fight choreography, an engaging story, and lots of fan service. But for reasons beyond my comprehension, this amazing series is constantly thrown under the bus. It frustrates me more than I can describe. But what do you guys think? Have you ever read Negima? If you have, what did you think of it? If you haven't, did this get you interested? Let me know all about it in the comments below. I'm planning on making a lot more Negima videos in the future, so subscribe if you don't want to miss those, and maybe leave a like if you enjoyed. That's about it from me. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.